I recently took an 8-night cruise with British-based cruise line Fred Olsen to the Norwegian Fjords. If you're considering a similar trip, keep watching to find out how it went, including one huge surprise on the trip. By the end of the video, you'll know if a Norwegian Fjords cruise with Fred Olsen is right for you. The Norwegian Fjords are one of the world's most popular cruise destinations, and with very good reason. These spectacular steep-sided natural waterways were carved out of the rock by the weight of glaciers over tens of thousands of years. Together with cascading waterfalls, a diverse ecosystem, snow-capped mountains, lush greenery and picturesque villages, the Norwegian Fjords are hard to beat for a cruise vacation. I joined the Borealis, a ship I previously sailed on back in January 2023, on this winter cruise to northern Norway in search of the Northern Lights. I made a video all about that trip if you're interested. With a capacity of just 1,300 passengers, the Borealis is on the smaller side of cruise ships. That means it's capable of docking at smaller ports and getting closer to waterfalls and other scenic features on fjords itineraries. But of course, it also means it doesn't have the bells and whistles of the newer, bigger ships, although the dining is generally very good. Only you'll know whether this style of cruise works for you. My 8-night Norwegian Fjords itinerary left Liverpool and included scenic cruising of the Lush before port calls in Eidfjord, Flåm and Bergen. One of the reasons this itinerary appealed to me was the fact we would take in 3 of Norway's best known fjords in just 8 nights. One important point, this itinerary was in mid-September. That's quite late for a fjords cruise and does result in more uncertain weather. That being said, you should always expect rain on a Norwegian Fjords cruise, whatever the time of year. You might be lucky, you might not. Embarkation at Liverpool was straightforward. It's nice to board at a terminal where you can just walk straight on the ship, rather than have to wait for a shuttle bus. By 5 p.m, we were off. The first day and a half was spent at sea, and that was a good opportunity to rediscover the Borealis. After 1.5 sea days, we arrived at the Lush, and it was the first opportunity to enjoy some scenic cruising. Most cruise ships are too big to come into this fjord, so I made the most of this rare opportunity to see the Lush from this vantage point, despite the occasional rain shower, as did many others. The Lush is the southernmost of Norway's famous fjords, and is known for its hiking trails, in particular Preikestolen, or Pulpit Rock, and the Kjerag Boulder. Rather him than me. We got a lot further into the fjord than I expected, sailing past well-known waterfalls and the small settlement of Fløli, known for its wooden staircase that you see here. It's an exhausting 4,444 steps long. Here's what that looks like from another, more dizzying perspective. By the way, if you're wondering about our accommodation, I've made a video all about the cabins on the Borealis. Check the video description for the link. The following morning, I awoke just in time to see our early arrival into Eidfjord, our first port of call, and an underrated fjords destination in my opinion. Eidfjord is at the end of the Hardangerfjord and just a short drive from Hardangervidda National Park. Many guests took excursions up to the mountains and especially to see the wonderful Verdingsfossen waterfall. Others chose to tour the village on the troll train. As I'd been to Eidfjord before, we simply went for a walk. Eidfjord is split by a river, and with the fjord and mountains too, pretty much everywhere you look there's a fantastic view. There's some curiosities in the central area too, including this huge wheel originally used in the nearby hydropower station. I was travelling with my mother and I wanted to show her the old church, so that made a nice point to aim for. Although we couldn't go right into the church, the front door was open, so we got to at least take a look at this church that dates back to the early 14th century. This was Eidfjord's main church until 1981, when the new church opened nearby. While nowhere near as attractive, the new church gives the community much more space and flexibility for community events. We thoroughly enjoyed our time in Eidfjord, but it was now time to head back to the ship for the sail along the Hardangerfjord, the second longest fjord in Norway and the 5th longest in the world. It wasn't long before we reached the Hardanger Bridge, Norway's longest suspension bridge, which spans the fjord north to south from tunnel to tunnel. It opened in 2013, replacing a ferry connection, and has cut the driving time between Oslo and Bergen. Many people joined us out on deck for the experience of sailing underneath this fantastic piece of engineering. Many people then went back inside, but they missed these wonderful views, with the light seeming to change every few seconds. Eventually, it was time for us to make our way inside to relax. We had some fun watching live music in the observation lounge, but I soon realised we were almost at another scenic cruising spot. So back outside it was, this time to take a close look at the waterfall Furbergsfossen, tucked just inside the Mauranger Fjord. This was another time when the advantages of being on a small ship with lots of outside space really paid dividends. Bigger ships just aren't able to turn here. Over dinner, we got excited about what the following day would bring. One of Norway's leading cruise ports and fjord destinations, Flåm is a truly spectacular place. This fjordside village is hemmed in by steep mountains at the end of one of the most scenic fjord cruises in all of Norway, but more on that later. After a sweet breakfast for energy, we watched as what seemed like the entire ship made their way to the world-famous Flåm Railway. The railway really is a must-do in Flåm, but as both me and my mum had done it before, we chose once again to take a walk. And once again, we aimed for a church, in this case Flåm Church in the older part of the village. The enjoyable 45-minute walk follows the route of the river, passing the Brekkefossen waterfall and the local school. Although Flåm Church is nowhere near as old as a Norwegian stave church, it is still more than 350 years old. Inside, it's one of Norway's best illustrated churches. The pulpit and Renaissance altarpiece are both from the 17th century. Back in the port area, it had become noticeably more busy, so after a quick bite to eat, I dropped in to visit the Railway Museum. This museum is small, but it's free to enter. It tells the remarkable story of the railway's construction in the 1920s and 1930s. I also took a quick stroll down to the waterfront, somewhere which always seems to be less crowded than the main centre, before making my way back on board. But our day was far from over. I knew the sail away from Flåm would be one of the highlights of the trip, despite the fierce winds, and so it proved. My mum and I put on our warmest clothes and headed out to the viewing platform at the front of Deck 6 to watch the ship sail the length of the Fjord. The pictures do the talking here really. We passed a waterfall and the village of Aurland before rounding the bend in the fjord to see another village, Undredal, off to the port side. Once we passed the entrance to the Fjord, we headed inside. Mum attended a cookery demonstration, and it was here we first heard whispers of aurora activity later that night. I was sceptical given how far south we were, but even so we decided this was a when in Rome moment. As the darkness arrived, we got dressed up in our warmest clothes once again. It took about an hour and a half of searching, interrupted by drinks breaks, until we saw a haze begin to form that I knew from experience was the aurora. It built up over about 15 minutes and then pulsed for just 30 seconds or so, just long enough for me to get this photo. The unexpected late night combined with a port call in a city we've both visited before meant we were in no rush to get up in the morning to see Bergen. We had just one item on our agenda. The last time we visited, Fantoft Stave Church had been closed, but this time it would be open. I had checked in advance. A walk, a quick ride on the light rail, followed by another short walk, and we were there. I've made another video telling the history of this wonderful building, so do check that one out if you're interested. Back in the city centre, we walked back to the ship, which took us past some of the most popular sites in Bergen. If you're visiting Bergen, I highly recommend taking the funicular railway Fløibanen or the cable car, as I've done on many previous visits. And then it was time to leave Norway behind. But that was not the end of our adventure. On the way back to Liverpool, there was a port call in Orkney, a great way to break up the long journey back and a personal highlight for me as I have family connections there. It was another early start for us as we watched the Borealis arrive in the port of Kirkwall. It was the first tender port of my trip, and in fact the first time I'd used a tender to get ashore on any cruise. I was super impressed with the tender operation, even though it was a little cramped inside. If you struggle with mobility, it's well worth checking how many tender ports are planned before you book. As well as my ancestry, I was keen to visit Kirkwall because of all the recent talk in the media about Orkney's relationship with Norway. The connections are clear to see, most notably inside the striking St Magnus Cathedral. Here, the flags of the United Kingdom and Norway hang side by side. There is a Norwegian language Bible on display, and this statue of St Olav was a gift from the Church of Norway. There is so much history in Kirkwall, and I'd love to go back to see more of Orkney, especially the Neolithic sites. There were several tours going there, but we prioritised family research on this trip. On the final day, we sailed close to some of the Hebrides, and with improved weather there was a nice atmosphere out on deck as we came to the end of our cruise. I thoroughly enjoyed being back on Fred Olsen's Borealis for this Norwegian Fjords cruise. I didn't talk too much about the ship in this video, so if you are curious, check out this complete ship tour video from my first trip on the Borealis. Thanks for watching.